Hi, welcome to Happy Now, a channel dedicated to the pursuit of happiness, because you don't have to wait, you can be happy now. I'm Olivia. Today I'm going to talk about therapy and why it's a fantastic tool to help you look inward and make sense of emotions and reactions you may be having on a daily basis that don't make sense because they're hurting you and those around you. Looking inward is absolutely necessary to being happy now. I want to address some of the confusion regarding therapy and the general lack of awareness as to what great therapy and a great therapist can do for you. When it comes to emotional health, we're not so much talking about misinformation, but a plain lack of information. And when you do find information, it's dense and difficult to understand. So let's start with the fact that you don't need to be a psychiatric doctor of medicine or have a master's in counseling to understand this. I don't. I'm just a person looking for information in a way that I can apply to my life. Sometimes I feel like I need a PhD to understand some of this scientific and academic information, but what I really strive for is to have a PhD on how to live my life. To that end, I am a fan of distilling information to a basic level that I can understand, internalize, remember, and use every day. And that's what I've done with therapy. Before I continue, I want to say that I had oral surgery 2 weeks ago, something I'm going to talk about in a different video, but that's why I have a bruise on the lower right side of my face. So, what's the difference between a counselor, a therapist, and a psychotherapist? According to the therapists I've talked to, there is no difference. Those names are interchangeable. A therapist can call themselves counselor and vice versa. What I sense is that there are stigmas attached to these names. When I think psychotherapist, I think Freud, and some scary and intimidating images come to mind. When I think psychotherapist or when I think therapist or counselor, it's a lot less threatening, much more approachable. What distinguishes these professionals and what brings them together is their education. I'm going to use the term therapist because that's what I'm comfortable with. A licensed therapist has a master's level degree in counseling and usually works with clients doing client-based therapy. Someone who has a PsyD has a doctorate level degree, and although they can work with clients, they usually do diagnoses, evaluations, and research. Someone who has an MD is a psychiatric doctor of medicine, and they can write prescriptions. We all know that an MD next to a person's name means that they're a doctor anywhere in the United States. That is not the case in the field of mental health. The letters next to a licensed therapist's name can vary from state to state, and it could go something like Independent Licensed Mental Health Practitioner, or MHP. To add to that confusion, there are dozens and dozens of schools of therapy, enough to make your head hurt. Contextual therapy, post-structural therapy, narrative, solution-oriented, client-based, marriage, family are a few examples. What has worked for me is having a therapist who is eclectic and who is familiar with all these theoretical approaches and uses all, some, or none, depending on what I need. I've been very lucky to develop a great therapeutic relationship and have a great fit from the start. A lot of people I know have not had that experience. Some people have a bad experience with a therapist and they label all therapy bad. Not all therapists are created equal. And some people offer their services as counselors and therapists without a license. Some therapists are stuck with whatever theory they learned and whatever they're comfortable with, and they don't change or adapt based on your needs and progress. That's why it's helpful to know what you need and what you want, and that those wants and needs may change. I'm a very proactive person. My therapist picked up on that, and she taught me how to fish. And she told me that a lot of people come into her office and they just want fish, which is a short-term solution, and she gives that to them. But I wanted to learn how to fish, which is a long-term approach, and an approach that would allow me to be as self-sufficient as I could about my emotional health. So let me share with you a little bit about my journey into therapy before I go into the theory and techniques. If you've watched my intro video, you know that I used to think therapy was for weak people. And also that I used to be vegan for 16 years. Before I realized I was starving for 16 years as a vegan, I went to the naturopath, a medical practitioner who believes in natural medicine. And I went because my wife's health was falling apart. Now, my health was falling apart too, but I didn't realize it. He told her that she needed to reincorporate animal products back into her diet. And when he got to me, he did a traditional Chinese medicine muscle testing technique to test the strength of my internal organs. And he looked at me and he said, "Have you had emotional trauma in your life?" And I laughed. If you've watched my biography video, you may understand why I laughed. I said, "Yeah, doc, I've had some emotional trauma in my life." "Yeah, I can tell, it shows." And then he continued, "Most people don't realize that emotional trauma can manifest itself in the body. The pain literally imprints itself in the muscle tissue from the brain to the inner organs. And if people don't deal with this pain, it can very well lead to disease." My brain was on fire at this point because I had never heard this, but it made a lot of sense to me. I still didn't think I needed to go to the therapist, but when I seek guidance from an expert or an expert source like a well-researched book, I don't usually turn away from their suggestions without even trying. So 2.5 years ago, I went to the therapist for the first time, and I walked into her office, I sat on her couch, I crossed my arms, and I was silent. And 20 awkward or so seconds later, she said, "Why are you here?" I crossed my arms, still crossed, and I said, "Because the doctor told me to." And she just sat there, looking at me. And about 2 minutes later, my reluctance broke, and I figured, well, I might as well make the best of this. So I said, "Look, I have to explain to you my life so you can understand. But actually, I have to explain to you my parents' lives so that you can really understand." And for the next 3 sessions, I didn't stop talking. And then it was about the 4th session that we got to the present. And I said, "I have a wonderful marriage. I'm married to a wonderful person. But this is the first time we're living together after 3 years because we've been physically separated. She's been studying in a different state. And we live in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I find myself overreacting to a lot of little things. They seem big at the time, but afterwards I realized they were just trivial. For example, I'm the one who cooks. She's the one who does the dishes. So after dinner, I'm in the kitchen cleaning up, and she's on her computer, and I'm starting to think, well, when's she gonna do the dishes? And a little more time goes by, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm doing everything here. What is she doing? Is she playing? What? How come she's not doing the dishes? And then some more time goes by, and I think, well, if she loved me, she would do the dishes. And I'm also thinking, this is absurd. You're crazy. Stop overreacting. But the feelings don't stop. And I get resentful, and eventually I blow up. And she doesn't know where or how that happened and why. And now she's upset. So I looked at my therapist and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "You're emotionally overreacting because you've been emotionally triggered. It's a primary emotion of some kind of pain of not feeling loved or safe. The elements that tie human relationships together are love and trustworthiness." And she handed me 2 diagrams from a book called Restoration Therapy by Drs. Terry Hargrave and Franz Switzer. But I didn't know this at the time. I just had the diagrams, and they were labeled violation of love and violation of trust. And then she continued, "The pain you're feeling when you're emotionally triggered, which I call spinning, is not a pain from the present. It's a pain from the past, from a time when a violation of love or trust or both happened, usually your childhood. That doesn't mean that you can't feel violation and emotion from adult trauma like divorce, but most people have to dig far back into their past to figure out where their pain is coming from." So I looked at the diagrams again. The violation of love diagram showed that a violation of love results in feeling pain and confusion over who you are as an individual. And you feel unloved, insignificant, alone, rejected, hopeless, abandoned, and unappreciated. And you react in 2 ways: by blaming others, being sarcastic, arrogant, aggressive, and withdrawing to punish. Or you react by shaming yourself, being depressed, negative, anxious, needy, manipulative, and withdrawing to pout or sulk. The violation of trust diagram showed that a violation of trust results in feeling pain and confusion over the safety of relationships. And you feel unsafe, insecure, used, guilty, out of control, disconnected, betrayed, and unable to measure up to expectations. And you react in two ways: by using control behaviors, being controlling, performance-driven, perfectionistic, defensive, critical, demanding, nagging, and withdrawing to defend yourself. Or you react by using escape/chaos behaviors, being selfish, addicted to substance, irresponsible, impulsive, dramatic, avoidant, secretive, and withdrawing to avoid people and situations. So I looked back at my therapist, and she said, "Did you communicate to your wife exactly when you wanted her to do the dishes?" I said, "No." "Well, she's not a magician. She's not clairvoyant. She can't read your mind. If you don't tell her exactly what you want, how's she supposed to know?" So I thought about it, and I said, I just realized that no one ever asked me what I wanted as a kid. I did what I was told and whatever I had to do to survive. And looking at these diagrams, I see that a lot of my issues come from violations of trust. I developed behaviors like being perfectionistic and performance-driven to make sure my mom would love me. And I made sure that I didn't make any mistakes so she wouldn't stop loving me. She said, "What are you feeling when you're standing in the kitchen spinning about your wife not doing the dishes?" I said, "I'm feeling frustrated, annoyed, angry." "No, those are secondary feelings. Look at the diagram. What are the primary emotions that you're feeling?" I said, "I'm feeling insecure, used, fearful, out of control, and disconnected." "And how do you react?" "I react by wanting to control the situation, being defensive, judging, critical, and nagging." So I looked at her like I had just discovered how to make fire. And I said, "Okay, so how do I fix it?" And she said, "You have to understand what's happening first. When you're emotionally triggered, the mechanisms of survival, which are regulated by the limbic system in your brain, kick in. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for all the automatic processes in your body, like the digestive system. The sympathetic nervous system is part of the autonomic nervous system, and it stimulates the fight, flight, and I like to add freeze, survival response. So fight, flight, freeze, survival mode. What happens when you're in the mountains and a bear is chasing you? Your survival mechanisms kick in. And you're going to try to get away from that bear as fast as possible. You're going to run, or you may choose to fight, or you're going to freeze. Well, let's say you're driving, you're listening to music, and you're thinking about what you're going to have for lunch and what chores you need to do in the evening. And then through your peripheral vision, you see that a car's about to T-bone you. The snapshot of your brain at that moment is like a computer screen when you swipe up, and all the screens that you were simultaneously working on move to the edges, and you're focused on one thing. Forget the music, forget lunch, forget chores. All you care about is swerving to get away from that car. I said, okay. The brain can't tell the difference between a bear chasing you, a car about to T-bone you, and emotional trauma. The brain releases stress hormones, adrenaline, and all the mechanisms of survival, whether a lion is chasing you in the African savannah, or you're standing in your kitchen spinning about your wife not doing the dishes because a primary emotion of pain has been triggered. What happens in survival mode is that your cognitive abilities take a step back, and in some cases shut down. So when you're emotionally triggered and somebody is trying to talk quote-unquote sense into you, you're not mentally capable of understanding what they're saying. Do things get worse when your wife is trying to talk to you when you're spinning? I said, yes. I either make it worse by saying something stupid, or I can't understand what she's saying and she gets frustrated. It usually takes me between 20 minutes to 2 hours to calm down, figure out what happened, and resolve the situation. She says that's because your cognitive abilities have come back at that point. So I look at her and I say, okay, so how do I fix it? And she said, you have to pay attention when you're getting emotionally triggered and walk yourself back from the ledge of overreaction by asking 3 questions. 1, is this situation life or death? No. 2, is this important? Meaning, is this a life-impacting event or situation that will change your life? No. 3, is this significant? Will you remember this next year? No. If you've answered no to those 3 questions, chances are you're overreacting. So for the next couple of sessions, we went over this, we broke down more examples, and I stopped going to the therapist. I took what she taught me and applied it to my life for 2 years. Every time I was overreacting, I went through this process, and by myself or with my wife, and I hashed and rehashed. And after a while, I noticed that instead of realizing after the fact that I was emotionally triggered, I realized as it was happening. And I was able to manage it and not let it get out of control. And instead of taking me 20 minutes to 2 hours to resolve, it was taking me 10 to 15 minutes. And then about 3 months ago, I visited my wife because we were physically separated again. And I had a out-of-body-like experience. I thought, I am so calm and balanced, and all the little things that used to trigger me don't anymore. And it's not that I'm actively trying not to overreact and walking myself through the process like I had been before. I was in a twilight zone where it was automatic. I was at peace. And because I was at peace and not trying to control everything and nagging, my wife was at peace. And it was a wonderful realization. And now I seldom overreact. When I do, I walk myself through the process, and I get better, and my relationships get better. Before I go into the theory, let me share with you one more thing. For a long time, I've known that the relationship with my sister is basically non-existent. If you've watched my biography video, you may understand my background. And I don't have a relationship with my sister. And for a long time, I've had a lot of guilt to have a relationship. My mom put a lot of pressure on us to come together and be perfect sisters because of her own sense of guilt. So for the past few years, we've had minimal interaction. And during my last deployment, I blew up at her via text, and she didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. And I said, okay, I'll figure this out someday, but I don't have the energy right now. Meanwhile, I came back from my deployment with this awareness that ever since I had started working on my emotional health, everything else that I had been working on in terms of nutrition, lifestyle, and detoxification were coming together to help me achieve my status of being happy now. And I was incredibly happy and grateful. So I decided to look over my personal mission statement and review my roles, priorities, and goals. And if you want to know more about that, you can watch my 7 Habits video. But in doing this, I remembered that relationships, including the one to myself, are the number 1 priority in my life. And I thought, I cannot not have a relationship with my sister. That's unacceptable to me. I know I'm better than this. I know I can do better. I grew up with aunts and uncles who chose not to be involved in my life, and I didn't want that for my children. How could I look my child in the eyes and tell him or her that I don't talk to my sister? Now, if I do everything in my power to make that happen and it still doesn't happen, I can live with that. But I haven't done everything in my power. So I was energized, I was motivated. The fear and reluctance were still there, but the desire to mend my relationship with my sister was greater. This was a Sunday. I called a therapist on Monday. I made an appointment for Tuesday, and I went to her office. And I said, I can't stand my sister. Her voice grates at me like nails on chalkboard. I feel like I'm permanently talking to a triggered 5-year-old. And she said, do you realize that 33-year-old Olivia is not responding to your triggered 5-year-old sister? Is your triggered 7-year-old that's reacting to her triggered 5-year-old? And I looked at her and I said, oh, what is your 7-year-old feeling? She said. And I thought about it. I had been thinking about it during my deployment. And I said, like, she had to be perfect. Like I had to bear the whole brunt of my mother's lack of motherhood. Like I had to be the sole adult and protector. I resented my sister because she did what I couldn't. She rebelled. She demanded in whatever little broken way she could for my mother to be a mother. She refused not to be a child, and I didn't allow myself that. I didn't have room to be her sister because I was too busy being my mom's mother and trying to be perfect so she would love me. And she said, do you realize that you and your sister's dysfunctional family environment never allowed you to bond? It is with siblings that babies first learn how to share. They learn about conflict resolution. They learn that you can have different opinions and likes and respect that. And you never had that. And you had to have someone to blame for the instability and negative emotions in your life. And it couldn't be your mother because she was the provider. So you turned on each other. And now you've set the bar for the relationship with your sister at perfection, which is impossible in any relationship, let alone one that is so damaged. You are starting at 0 to build a relationship with your sister. And when she said that, this pressure that had been like an anvil on my shoulders lifted. What happened to me and my sister was not our fault. But now I'm an adult and I have a choice. And I'm taking responsibility for what I want our relationship to be for the rest of our lives. And I'm taking it step by step from 0. And that's all I can do. And suddenly it seemed doable. It seemed achievable. That's an example of me living my life and being happy now and wanting to address something and needing a little nudge of wisdom from a therapist to help me. Because life is a constant journey of learning. And someday I'm going to have kids, and those kids may produce some stress, and I may need help again. And that's okay. When I set out to make this video, I asked my therapist where those diagrams of violation of love and trust had come from. And she said from a book called Restoration Therapy by Drs. Terry Hargrave and Franz Fitzer. And I knew I had to read this book to make this video. Those diagrams and her advice has single-handedly helped me to put my emotional life back together. And I wanted to understand the mechanisms that had been at work. And I wanted sharper tools in my toolbox, and I wanted to get even better. Restoration therapy has affected my knowledge profoundly. It's not a book geared towards the average person. It's called Restoration Therapy, Understanding and Guiding Healing in Marriage and Family Therapy. So it was written for therapists. And because of that, it's actually a little dense. But I have extracted the pearls of information from this book. If you want to know more in depth what I'm going to talk about, and you want to have access to the fantastic diagrams in this book, I highly recommend it. Doctors Hargrave and Fitzer write that love and trustworthiness are the elements of human relationships, and they are essential for human existence. They are the food and water of our souls that feed our individual identity and provide a context for intimacy with others. Without identity and intimacy, normal development is not possible, and individuality is threatened. As children develop within their families of origin, they develop ideas about who they are and how they are to behave in relationships. They come into the world with a blank slate, and as they experience love and trustworthiness, or the lack of it, words and meaning get written onto this slate, and they serve as a basis for constructing individual identity and the beliefs about how to behave in relationships. There are two questions a child asks when it is born. The first is, who am I? And the answer to that question comes from the love of others. And it is a place where the child draws perspective on individual identity. The second question is, am I safe? The answer comes from the care and nurturing the child receives, and it determines the trustworthiness around the situation the child was born into. There are three aspects of love that are crucial for the development of a healthy individual identity and a sense of self. The first aspect of love is companionate love, usually associated with commitment and friendship. When we receive this type of love, it communicates an intimate exchange and mutual connection. When we receive companionate love, we feel that when the hard issues of life come, there will be someone there to provide care, assistance, and support. In the formation of our sense of self, companionate love tells us that we are not alone. Even though we associate this kind of love with friendships, it is essential for us to receive companionate love from our families of origin and original caregivers to feel that essential sense of belonging. The second type of love is romantic or passionate love. We usually associate this with sexual relationships, but it is also essential in the formation of a sense of self. This love carries elements of fascination, passion, excitement, and even obsession. No other person or object will meet or can meet that particular longing of your beloved. It is easy to see how this love meets the criteria for lovers, but it is also in effect for caregivers. When a caregiver holds a child and is fascinated by his or her features, when in spite of limitations, a caregiver sees the child as flawless or perfect, when they are amazed by the child's gifts, talents, and abilities. When we receive romantic or passionate love, whether from a lover or a caregiver, we feel that we are one of a kind, precious, and unique. The third aspect of love is altruistic love, and it carries with it the implications of sacrifice for the good of the beloved. This love is also essential in the formation of a sense of self in the families of origin and caregiving relationships. True sacrificial love means that the one who loves puts his or her needs aside for the needs and wants of the beloved. And although Romeo and Juliet were willing to give their lives for each other, when we're talking about smaller, less dramatic sacrifices, we're talking about a parent who works more to provide an opportunity or a lesson for a child, or a parent who doesn't buy him or herself clothes, but instead provides for the child, or someone who gives something without expecting anything in return. The amount of sacrificial love is not so much measured in the depth of the sacrifice, but in the willingness to sacrifice. Altruistic love communicates worthiness to the recipient. These three aspects of love are essential in the formation of a sense of self, but no human love is perfect. And when any of these loves are missing, we are left to doubt who we are in the need for healthy self-esteem. Trustworthiness is the other essential element for a healthy individual identity and a concept of how to behave in relationships. Trustworthiness addresses the issue of safety in relationships, and it is the foundation for how an individual will interact in relationships during his or her lifetime. There are three aspects of trustworthiness. The first is predictability. Chaos and unpredictability destroy a sense of consistency responsibility, and reliability. Within this chaotic context, the child learns that the caregiver and the environment are unreliable, unpredictable, and untrustworthy. And the child learns to rely on him or herself or drifts into a hopeless inability to stabilize. If, however, the caregiver and the environment are predictable and stable, the child will learn to rely on order and consistency and will look forward to that interaction. Predictability makes the child dependent on the reliable giving of another. Predictability teaches stability, and it contributes to our sense of safety and reduces our fear. There are two aspects of predictability: responsibility and reliability, meaning a caregiver has to be responsible in a reliable way, responsible consistently and repeatedly. The second aspect of trustworthiness is justice or balance. All relationships demand balance. In a horizontal relationship, there is a symmetrical give and take between individuals of equal stature, such as spouses, siblings, or friends. And I talk about this more in detail in my Love and Relationships video. To illustrate justice and balance here, I'm going to focus on the vertical, asymmetrical relationship between a parent and a child. And this isn't just a relationship between one generation. It's a relationship between successive generations. A parent is expected to give without compensation. Is this balanced? No. Is it fair? Yes, because a child didn't ask to be born. A parent is responsible to give the child physical provision, protection, nurturing, love, and discipline. A child is expected to give nothing in return. Only a parent or original caregiver can provide the essential elements that shape identity and behavior in relationships. A child can never provide those essential elements for him or herself. The love and trustworthiness a child gets without expecting anything in return, they hold as merit for future use. Because when that child grows up and he or she becomes a parent, he or she will then give to their child without expecting anything in return. When this trust is broken and a child is expected to fulfill duties of a parent, it doesn't affect just one generation. It affects each successive generation, as each tries to compensate for the love and nurture they didn't get, each expecting their own children to fulfill needs they were never capable or meant to fulfill. Justice and balance through generational lineage can produce tremendous trustworthiness. The child receives what he or she is entitled to and learns a sense of security. And this security then plays a major role in the child achieving competency in how to engage and give in relationships in the future. And it helps to build a sense of hopefulness. The third aspect of trustworthiness is openness. We've all admired someone we thought was perfect and realized they weren't and were disappointed. And then we wonder if anyone who is worthy is truly projecting who he or she is. People are truly projecting who they are when including the fact that they're not perfect. They make mistakes, they have flaws. In other words, a person is only being human and worthy of respect and admiration when open about their imperfections so they can deal with them honestly. Openness is essential for us to trust in relationships because it allows us to deal constructively with the elements of imperfection and grow. Openness also provides the possibility to demonstrate vulnerability in emotions and thoughts. Vulnerability of any kind in relationships serves as an invitation for intimacy, in that it is an act of giving. Lack of honesty destroys openness, deteriorates trustworthiness, and leads to distant and secretive behavior. There is no giving, no intimacy, and no opportunity for relational growth. All human beings come into this world looking for love and trustworthiness. They are the essential constructs for individual identity and a sense of safety in relationships. There are two parts of the brain that are helpful to remember. The first is the limbic system in the midbrain, which is involved in the processing of emotions and memory. The second is the cortex, which is the more advanced thinking part of the brain where the cognitive processes are happening. So the meanings around identity, concerning identity around love and trustworthiness, are not higher brain functions. They're happening in the more innate, basic processes of the limbic system, which is always trying to achieve homeostasis, which is balance. Even in the best of circumstances, a child will never be exposed to a perfect, loving, and trustworthy environment all the time. But at worst, a child will experience neglect, abuse, and hate. These types of assaults stimulate and activate the limbic system, meaning that if a child or infant doesn't get love and trustworthiness, it produces stress and distress, which result in an emotional reaction, which demand a response from our fight, flight, and freeze survival mechanisms to deal with the pain of not knowing who you are or if you are safe. These types of violations lead to self-reactivity and coping mechanisms to survive. When you're emotionally triggered, the part of your cognitive brain shuts down. So you are not capable of rationally thinking about how you are reacting to a particularly painful emotional trigger at that moment. Individuals can fall into a pattern of destructive coping strategies. There are four reactive styles of coping. When we're talking about a violation of love, we're talking about feeling unloved and reacting by blaming others or shaming yourself. When we're talking about a violation of trust, we're talking about feeling unsafe and reacting by using control behaviors or escape/chaos behaviors. I'm going to talk about the four reactive styles of coping, but that doesn't mean there aren't other ways to cope. These are just the ways that doctors Hargrave and Fitzer have identified as the most common. Number 1, blaming. Individuals who are self-reactive with blame feel that they are deeply entitled to be loved, and they act on the violation in an accusatory fashion. Blamers are arrogant, and they tend to demand and demean others in an attempt to secure a sense of self. 2, shaming yourself. And like blamers shamers are dealing with the same type of violation of love that blamers are, but instead of blaming, they have come to the conclusion that the reason for the lack of love in their lives is that they are unlovable. They believe there is nothing worthy, unique, or desirable about themselves for companionship or intimacy. Depression and negativity are usually present, and shamers are needy. They have little confidence in their ability to contribute, but they make it clear that they want others to contribute to them. The third reactive style of coping is using control behaviors. Controllers make sure they depend on no one. They believe that the dependency and intimacy required in relationships are too risky and will likely only lead to pain. They have a knack for finding out what's expected of them in performance situations and exceeding those expectations to protect themselves from negative feedback. The invulnerability and perfectionism of controllers leads to attitudes that are judgmental, critical, demanding. The skills a controller develops of being performance-driven and achieving are positive attributes of human agency and will. The difference between someone who is performance-driven and emotionally healthy is that they depend and interact with others. They're confident and they have their own purpose. A controller is performance driven in a reactive way, to become all powerful in any given situation, seeking power and control for their own safety at the expense of the control, power, and efficacy of others. And it's never enough. Controllers always want to achieve more because they never feel safe. The fourth reactive style of coping is using escape/chaos behaviors. Unlike controllers who have figured out a way to make a situation safe for themselves, escapers have given up. They are driven by the flight survival response in the brain, believing that there is no way they can make a situation or relationship safe for themselves. So they consent to the powerlessness to fail to succeed or be intimate. This type of reactivity produces a tremendous amount of irresponsibility, and it's a style of coping that is unmanageable and chaotic. Because escapers don't deal with the pain directly, they seek to escape and numb it. At the low end of coping, escapers seek relief by sleeping, shopping, and eating too much. At the more serious levels, escapers will depend on substances like drugs and alcohol, or behaviors like gambling and viewing pornography. At the more extreme levels, escapers will be into full-blown addictive behavior, uncontrollable impulsive behavior, and disassociation. Both styles of controllers and escapers produce people who are not intimate, not balanced in the giving and taking in relationships, and not open with others. There are several patterns that can develop with these styles of coping. It's called turnstiling, when you go from one reactive style to another in a vicious cycle. Some people go through one, some two, three, four, depending on the emotional trigger. If you want to know about these patterns, I recommend restoration therapy. And as always, I link anything I recommend and additional information below the video. There are 3 reasons people go to therapy. The first is to solve a problem, like I want to stop drinking, I want to stop being anxious, I want to stop being violent. Well, the obvious solutions are stop drinking, stop being anxious, stop being violent. Most people who go to therapy have tried the obvious solutions and failed. A great therapist can help you succeed with the solutions you already know, but haven't figured out how to do on your own yet for some reason. The second reason people go to therapy is to change someone else. There are a couple of problems with this. The first is that the person seeking to change someone else is most likely missing large issues in his or her life that govern a large part of the problem. The second problem is that no human being can change another human being. We alone are responsible for our own insight, understanding, responsibility, and motivations. If you change yourself, whether in behavior, motivations, or attitude, it systematically affects all those who are in relationships with you. Now that you know, the third reason, the third and final reason that people go to therapy is to tell stories, to have their narratives validated by a therapist. So it turns out that most people don't go to therapy with an idea to change and grow. Now that you know that love and trustworthiness are essential for us to thrive and be happy now, and you know what happens if we don't get it, and you're like me and you want to figure out a way to help yourself, what do? What I shared with you earlier about my initial journey into therapy and that technique I used, those were my guerrilla tactics. I think Doctors Hargrave and Fitzer are geniuses who have given me the most sophisticated tools to help myself. And now I have a full-blown battle plan. They have come up with 4 steps to rewire the human brain, which I find fascinating. Insight and self-awareness are incredibly important, but insight alone is not powerful enough to produce lifelong change. Once the brain learns certain thoughts and behaviors, it is tenacious in holding on. It actually prefers old behavior to new learning. Most of our thoughts, reactions, and behaviors are a result of automatic or at least semi-automatic executive operating systems. The neural states we have learned are the ones we come back to repeatedly, even if we don't particularly like those thoughts and behaviors. Doctors Hargrave and Fitzer write that while the executive operating systems of fight, flight, and freeze that function around threats of identity and safety, and the other, more positive executive operating systems that focus on new learning and bonding are underutilized and underdeveloped. It is possible to rewire the neural pathways in our brain of how we react in our brains. Instead of reacting negatively to an emotional trigger, we can train ourselves to respond positively and choose a different behavior. Neuroscientists agree that the mechanisms that allow the brain to acquire new skills and behaviors are based on repetition. Military aircrew members train for this every day. We go over checklists repeatedly, and we imagine ourselves in situations where safety may be compromised on the ground or in the air. And we train ourselves to react in a way that is safe and calm so we can perform our checklist and not succumb to crippling fear. Pilots have to memorize boldface items. These are checklist items for emergencies like engine fire, where there is no time to look at a checklist. They have to perform these steps automatically from memory in the face of extreme stress, or everyone potentially dies. So in the Air Force, we're trained through repetition every day and by imagining ourselves in emergency situations to rewire our brain and act in a life-saving and effective capacity. In the restoration therapy model, 4 steps are used to interrupt the old patterns and create a new emotional state and move to a new emotional state where we can choose positive behaviors. These steps may seem simple, but said out loud, they have a profound effect on our neural states, and they can give us a tremendous opportunity to change. The first step to rewire your brain is to say what you feel. This may sound easy, but it can be incredibly difficult to identify what you're feeling, especially when you're spinning. Saying you're frustrated or angry are secondary feelings, more tied to the reactive responses to the primary emotions of feeling unloved and unsafe. To interrupt the old patterns requires you identify what you're feeling from past information using cognition and the cortex. Saying out loud what you feel moves information to the left hemisphere of the brain where language is actually processed, formulated, and activated. Just thinking about what you're feeling is not powerful enough because when you're emotionally triggered, part of your cognitive brain shuts down. And those automatic brain survival reactions are so strong. Saying it, what you feel out loud, gives the brain a fighting chance to bring into play new brain activity and focus your attention differently. The second step of how to rewire your brain is say what you normally do. Most people are remarkably consistent about the primary emotions of pain that they feel and the reactive styles of coping that they use. Naming your pattern of reactivity out loud makes it less likely that you will repeat those behaviors. And calling attention to that reactivity interrupts the emotional flooding and while raising your consciousness to that reactivity. Steps 1 and 2 allow you to choose cognition in the face of emotional turmoil. And because they interrupt the automatic brain process, they set the stage for new emotions and behaviors, which leads me to step 3 of how to rewire your brain, which is say the truth. Changing neural pathways is not easy. Water flows down the path of least resistance, and so does brain activity. Saying the truth about yourself goes something like this. Because I was treated in an unloving and untrustworthy fashion doesn't mean that someone deserves punishment, and it doesn't mean that I am worthless. Or, people make mistakes because they're human. Because people make mistakes with me doesn't mean they deserve to be blamed. And because I make mistakes with people doesn't mean that I am bad or useless. The truth about yourself, one way or another, is that you are loved and you are safe. You are worthy and you are capable. You are hopeful and you are validated. One of the techniques to help heal and find this truth about yourself is called self-parenting. And it involves imagining yourself at a time when you were vulnerable and a violation of love and or trust or both happened. And you're playing the role of the caregiver and parenting yourself by saying what should have been said and what should have been done. And doing that starts the healing process. I talk about this more in detail in my inner child video. But essentially in this step, you're finding out the truth about yourself and you're saying it out loud. The fourth and final step of how to rewire your brain is to make a different behavioral choice. When you come in contact with the truth about yourself through self-parenting or other techniques, it gives you the opportunity to replace the emotion of violation with love and trustworthiness. Instead of feeling unloved, alone, unappreciated, and insecure, you can contact feelings of safety, uniqueness, worthiness, security, and balance. And those feelings go far in stimulating the executive operating systems in the brain that are focused on new learning and bonding. In the book Restoration Therapy, there are diagrams of being grounded in the truth of love and being grounded in the truth of trustworthiness. Being grounded in the truth of love leads to feeling peace and confidence over who you are as an individual. And you feel loved, significant, accepted, wanted, appreciated, hopeful, and encouraged. And you choose to nurture others by being loving, encouraging, inclusive, kind, patient, and forgiving. And you choose to value yourself by being positive, humble, respectful, joyful, self-aware, and optimistic. Being grounded in the truth of trustworthiness leads to feeling peace and confidence over the safety of relationships. And you feel safe, fulfilled, able, in control, protected, intimate, and successful. And you choose to be vulnerable in relationships by being open, giving, balance in the giving and taking, engaging, and accepting of imperfection. And you choose to be reliable in intimacy by being respectful, by being responsible, self-controlled, faithful, problem-solving, and forthcoming. These are some of the strengths that come from primary emotions anchored in love and trustworthiness that you can choose instead of destructive coping mechanisms as you're trying to make a different behavioral choice. It's a good place to start to do the opposite of your reactive style. For example, if you're a blamer, choose to nurture others. If you're a controller, choose to be vulnerable in relationships. When we take responsibility for our own neural states and our own truth, we connect in relationships. And it prompts the possibility of more positive attachment rather than attachment based on being dependent and needy. Repetition and practice is king when it comes to rewiring the brain and trying to get good at anything. Doctors Hargrave and Fitzer write that this approach works in the toughest of cases. They believe that if someone practices this 90 times, they become familiar with the components of the old reactive style, as well as the process of the new cognitive map. Some people spend hours doing dozens and dozens of muscular reps in the gym to change the way their muscles look. This is no different, except we can't see it. We are doing emotional reps to working them so that we can create new, chiseled, buff, positive neural pathways. Doctors Terry Hargrave and Franz Fitzer have written an incredible book, fantastically proactive. They have so much knowledge, compassion, insight, professionalism, and respect, not only for the clients they're trying to help, but for the therapists they're trying to guide to be the best therapist they can be. If you're able to extract the gold in this book, then you'll be rich, and you'll have sharper tools in your emotional health toolbox. This book has life-changing diagrams or examples between therapists and clients where you can really see the progression of growth. I feel this book is a result of a lifetime of work, observation, research, and dedication to their chosen profession. I know it has changed my life and is still changing it. I wholeheartedly recommend restoration therapy. Because it was written for therapists, it made me realize just how much work goes into being a therapist. Having to listen to people's problems every day, all day, while still being a human being and having your own issues. There's a joke that therapists are the craziest people. That may be, especially if they have to listen to us. But they still take the time to help you. I want to thank all therapists, especially the ones who wrote this book and the one who helped me to change my life. I thank her tremendously for who she is and for the way she approaches her practice, and for giving me a fishing rod and teaching me how to fish, and where to look for the right fish, and what methods of cooking to use to cook my fish right, and figure out which ones are nutritious for me and which ones I need to throw back because they're not good for me. And sometimes I may forget my fishing rod, I may catch the wrong fish, or I may overcook it. But that's okay, because tomorrow I'll remember my fishing rod, I'll catch the right fish, and I'll cook it just right. And someone may be fishing next to me, and they may catch a fish, and they may share it with me. That's what my therapist has done for me. And I can't take her with me, because when I move states, she can't practice online due to insurance restrictions. But that is the true measure of what she's given me, because I don't have to take her with me. I have the tools to help myself for the rest of my life, and she has set a high bar for what I think a great therapist is, who works with me as an individual with my unique personality. To all therapists, thank you for the incredible work that you do, especially in a society that doesn't necessarily understand or appreciate what you're up against. Thank you. We've all met, or at least seen, wonderful families. They get along with the grandparents, maybe even the great-grandparents. The siblings get along with each other. The parents get along with the children. It's one big, happy family. And we wondered, how can I get that? Or why don't I have that? What these families have done is build love and trustworthiness throughout generations. Their ledgers of justice are balanced. There's no reason you or I can't have that. We can't change the past or whatever happened. Sometimes we can build a bridge with our caregivers and move forward. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes the rift and the damage are too great and that link is broken forever. But the buck always stops with you. We have the ability from this moment on to shape the rest of our lives and shape the lives of future generations. And I can tell you that I'm going to have one big, happy, intergenerational family. And that doesn't mean that I have the answers to all the questions. But I have awareness and a desire to make it happen. And I'm trying. And that's all any of us can do. And it's not going to be easy. It's probably going to be painful. Whatever issues and wounds you have did not develop overnight, and they won't heal overnight. But things will start to get better, and you will start to feel that love and trustworthiness seep into your life. And like a wilted plant, you will rise to face the sunshine and start to bloom. Keep moving forward day by day to strive to be a better person and have more balanced relationships with people who are on the same page and have the same vision. Recently, I had the opportunity to spend many hours with military wounded warriors, extraordinary men and women. And they're not extraordinary because they're wounded. They're extraordinary because they're willing to face those wounds, whether visible or invisible, every day, head on. And that is a true sign of strength and courage. I'm not a wounded warrior. I'm a person who has wounds, invisible wounds, but I don't let those wounds define who I am or how I choose to live my life. Whatever cards you drew in life, there's no reason you can't work to get a full house and rock that game, because it's your life and it's your future. If you've enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. And consider subscribing so you can get the latest Happy Now video every week. In addition, I love to hear in the comments below how therapy has affected your life. Remember, happiness is an active choice. You don't have to wait. You too can be happy now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.